All right, so before lunch, Abby asked a question that, if I recall, was about effectively what is it like if you're going to plant near like a hillsong? And are you thinking that people might have been damaged by a hillsong? What's your sort of, who have you got in mind? Yeah, it's a great question. I think awareness is the big key. So being aware, we're going to an area where there's going to be a lot of, for me, ex-Hillsong that might have left for a whole variety of reasons. They might have left because they're not actually Christians, because they've never really heard the gospel right. They might have left because they got disillusioned with different sort of things that have been going on. They might have left because they were actually serving in the church and then got really burnt because they've got really worn out and they were pretty much told, you've got to keep going for Jesus, and they didn't, and they've had enough. I think awareness is the key. So and then the key to them coming is your preaching. When they come and they hear grace, it's often where people go, I hadn't heard that before. And they're attracted to it. So the worship in some ways for us, and I don't necessarily do it super deliberately, but it's certainly a part of it. I don't want it to feel Hillsong, but I do want it to be, I want to be able to help them see we can do that with probably better worded songs. But the preaching is actually where it's all at for us, not actually this in the same way. And usually people are a bit mesmerized by that. It's like, oh, this is different. And they can tell it quite quickly. They're usually affected as well, because we're just not as big as a Hillsong, by the community. The joy of the people and the grace of the people, and it's usually really attractive to them. So for me, it wouldn't put me off. It hasn't put me off planting into a Hillsong area at all. I actually find it quite good, because a lot of them are just going to be like me. They're probably going to know God, but not know much else, and probably a bit emotionally led, all those things. So it would affect my preaching diet, and it would affect some of the sort of applications. Maybe you're here today and you're thinking with your feelings. I understand that. I'm going to be at least aware of who's in the crowd. We have, strangely, both sides of the coin. So we have the ex-Hillsong, and then we have the ex-Anglican, who are very, very different. But you're just mindful so much. So it doesn't really, I haven't found it affects a ton what you do, but it does probably affect your tone. Say, for example, if I'm trying to get to know a new member, and they've come for a situation which was really occult-ish, because we've had that a few times. We're very slow with them, as in, it's like, hey, we have a membership, but I don't want you to feel rushed. We just want to love on you. Already that speaks statements to them, because they're like, oh, well, in my last church I had to just do whatever I got told, and we didn't like that. And I'm deliberately trying to negate their fears. So we had a couple actually recently that did join the church from a cult, came for about 3 weeks, and then haven't been able to make it back since. I think I've almost been having flashbacks and struggling. So they wrote to me actually just before I left, and they said, we just can't. And their theology's off, because they're like, I think we just need time by ourselves, healing. And you're like, oh, it just doesn't work like that. But I offered to get with them and said, look, we'd love to talk to you about that, but it's up to you guys. And they haven't even come back to me. And I'm not going to push that, because it's just like, you've got to know your people. That's not, if you push them, you're just playing into the narrative in their mind that I'm just told off every time it goes wrong. So you've got to know your sheep. I think that's the most story. And if you know you're going to get a lot of Pentecostal through, bear that in mind in the way you're preaching and what you're talking about. Focus on grace a lot and do that.
Yeah, and what else you do in membership course and things like that. Or just be mindful of it, but not limiting your doctrine around it to try and win them over. You don't want to downplay elder-led because they've been led astray by super apostles. However, it might not be your first card.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it is quite amazing to me. One of the things that you do find in Pentecostalism, in my environment, I don't know about yours, but usually the pastors are quite aloof. They're a bit superstar-y. You have an opportunity to change that every week. You can welcome people at the door. You can pack away the chairs at the end. People are just visually seeing like, well, this guy's very different to what I've known before. Even when we do announcements, actually, for us, I don't get up and say, hey, I'm Dave, I'm the lead pastor at this church. I actually say, hey, I'm Dave, I'm one of the pastors at this church. And I'm doing it deliberately, because I want them to understand there's not like this hierarchy thing, that I'm like this big boss. And it's funny how people pick up on it. They're like, oh, I didn't realize you were the lead pastor. I'm like, oh, yeah. but you're actually registering them with them, trying to get down in the right sense. To be honest, I think we've never, in a Sydney context, we'll definitely sing Hillsong songs. We'll sing any song that's good, more or less. And we've never had people think, oh, you're Hillsong, because they're experiencing it so differently. I mean, for a start, the worship leader's a man, and they're like, why is every worship leader's a man? So they're already seeing something quite different to what they've, and then like, oh, the guy that's preaching is also a man. So they're learning a ton as we go. And often the content is quite different. So we probably wouldn't do like 4 Hillsong songs.
Might do one every 2 weeks.
Yeah. I mean, if it fits, it fits. But we're going to make sure. But no, we have had, if you were an Anglican in our city, some of them wouldn't sing Hillsong songs. But actually, ironically, it plays into the hands of people thinking, yeah, I don't even like you, you're just legalists, because you don't even sing other people's songs. It actually worked against them, rather than go, no, we sing any song that's going to point us to Jesus, and we're thrilled to do that. And people usually go, oh, I like that. It's actually more inclusive. It's actually one of the questions when you even said about how do we partner with churches. In a weird way, it's even doing that type of stuff. We would pray for Hillsong on a Sunday. I wouldn't mind that at all. I'd pray, Lord, bless them. They're preaching the gospel. They're seeking their best. Lord, bless them. We don't spend ages sort of like, we're nervous of them. We don't do that. Maybe because it's my background. I think a lot of Hillsong type churches are actually filled with people who really love Jesus. They've often just been trained really badly and don't know what to do with it. But underneath it, they often really love the Lord, and you can actually influence them if you can get to know them. But as soon as you distance and we wouldn't even sing your songs, well, you're not going to influence them now. There's just a divide. And so that's how we play out. Do you sing? You sing?
Yeah. It's not much of an issue.
No. All right, so let's go with let's do it till 2 o'clock. So you've got 25 minutes. So we're now going to go through this section on people. So you've picked your place. You know where you're going to be going by now. Work through these questions now and say, all right, who are we going after? And then we'll finish that, and then we'll do teams.
And obviously, if you were doing this properly, I mean, you're going to be doing this in prayer, you're going to be doing this in counsel with other people, but we're just making a start on it now. Let's come back together and have a look. Let's start with Faisal. For your area that you were looking at, who are the people that you were trying to reach, and sort of combine some of these? Who are you trying to reach? What would be the primary target group, do you think? And what would be a typical person? So questions 1, 2, and 3.
So you've done the location and the people. Now we start to get, okay, I think it's teams. So it's like, all right, how are we actually going to build a team to go do this? So everything you've been talking about. How do we actually go do it?
This is a bit more like
This is going to be a lot more. You probably have a lot more questions and might be a bit more tricky. In some ways, this one is where a lot of your time ends up going. In fact, all 3, 4, and 5. 1 and 2 is more foundational, picking a place. What I'm going to do. This one now, okay. We're going in. All right, we'll go through it together first. We'll chat about it, and then you can dive on in.
Yeah, so I don't know if you find it helpful us kind of sharing how we answered it, but
Tell you a bit more
at least it gives you an example of how we've gone through it. So I'll read the questions again. So list the people who are already likely to accompany you on a church plant based on prior relationship. Note if they're a member of a Sovereign Grace church or not. List people who are likely to participate in the church plant based on current residence in the church plant location. Note if they're a member of a Sovereign Grace church or not. List people who would be likely to move from Ascending Church or another Sovereign Grace church in order to plant in this location. What is the ideal size of a church planting team for this location? How will you develop and train your team so that they're ready to help plant a Sovereign Grace church? What specific gifts, talents, or skill sets will be helpful on the team to launch a church in this location? What process will you deploy to engage your sending church and its pastors in recruiting people for a church planting team? Now, there's 7 questions, but I think there's more things we're going to talk about in this section than just that. So you might want to have your notes ready and things as we go. But let's at least start with the question. So Dave, I guess it was... list people who are already likely to accompany you on a church plant based on prior relationship.
My wife and kids.
Okay, that's good.
And then we had 2 families. We actually deliberately didn't want, in our context, because we were going from the UK to Australia, we didn't want to move all the way to the other side of the world and then bring effectively a UK church to Australia. It's different. So we deliberately actually said no to people. And so we just brought 2 families, one that came with us straight away and one that came with us a year later. And that was it.
Yeah, and for me, I had 28 people come with me, plus kids.
I'm still sad about it.
Yeah. Now, note if they're a member of a Sovereign Grace Church or not. Why does that matter?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I mean, if they're from a Sovereign Grace Church, so if you plant from this church and a group go with you, a lot of the work Michael will have already done for you. In terms of them understanding the shape of virtues, understanding the shared values, understand the sort of DNA of the church, and even what the church you're hoping it to look like, particularly if you like yourself, maybe it's like, yeah, I want it to look like this. That's a lot easier. If you've not got that, like I didn't have that, you're literally rocking up with a room like this, and everybody thinks they know Sovereign Grace, but they've never been in a Sovereign Grace church in their life. They might have heard a preacher on YouTube, and they've read C.J. Mahaney's books, and they think that they know everything about Sovereign Grace. You have to spend a long time shaping that team and discipling that team. Actually, in these things, it's actually like, okay, let's go through and help you understand who we are. Let's help people understand what that looks like. Even then, it's hard work because you start preaching and they go, I didn't think it was going to be like this, or I thought it was going to be something different. So it's much harder, not impossible. But when they're from a Sovereign Grace church, a lot of the work's already been done. So in some ways, your line is, hey, you've been at the part of this Trinity Fellowship for 3 years. Come and help me do it somewhere else. It's a lot easier.
Yeah. Okay, so list people who are likely to participate in the church plant based on current residence in the church plant location.
Well, that's what actually drew us to the area we went to. So there was already a group of people that didn't know each other, but there was a group of people already saying to Sovereign Grace, would you come and plant a church in Sydney? We really love your music. We've listened to some of the preaching. We really love it. Would you come? And so there was already a group of people. By the time we arrived, there was already 30 people meeting in a house and going through Living the Cross-Centered Life and Humility and some of those books. They still didn't really have the DNA, but at least they were making a start. I wasn't just rocking up and like, oh, I don't know anybody. In some ways, the very first day, you're like, well, welcome. We're going to be the church planted team, and I'm going to develop you over the next 3 months, and let's prepare to come. I wish I'd had longer, really. But
yes. Yeah, and for me, it was, we had people that were going to your church who lived in our area or near it, or were willing to move into it. So that made a difference. So it was a little
but
we had hardly anyone join our church who weren't a part of a Sovereign Grace church to begin with. So that has its pros and cons.
It does. So like we're considering a church plant in Canberra, which is our capital city in Australia.
About 3 hours drive from where we are.
Yeah, but there's already 4 or 5 families that if we went tomorrow would say, I would like to come. So that is obviously helpful. You're not literally just turning up as a pastor. You've at least got something. And you know what it's like. If they actually end up liking it, they ask their friends, and time and it grows. It's very rare for Sovereign Grace to just go to a place where you're like, yeah, we had absolutely nothing. And we just sort of arrived and had to go. It's a bit more detailed than that. There's more work being done, as you know, with these prospectuses.
So then you get to number 3 again. List people who'd be likely to move from the sending church or another Sovereign Grace church in order to plant in this location. And obviously that's going to be significant for you guys if you're moving quite a ways away, across the border, or if you actually need to be in the community where you're trying to reach, it's going to make a big difference. So
you might have some people as well. I mean, I'm not personally a big fan, and I'm not saying you can't do this, but I don't think it works very well when you have pastors, maybe because a few of you have mentioned like more poor areas. I've never seen it work well where the pastor doesn't actually want to move to the poor area, he just wants to live out and then just drop in. That often doesn't work so well. So for some people, if you're going to go to an area that's a bit more difficult, say for you guys, it might not be as easy to find 20 people that want to move there and do that, because they might be like, I don't think I could do that. They don't feel that calling, that gifting. I'm not saying they won't, but it can just be a harder sell. Sometimes as well, even in the richer areas, it can be a problem too, because people are like, oh, I'd love to go there, but I couldn't possibly afford to rent in that area. So there can be some real sacrifices there of sometimes ironically stepping up and sometimes stepping to more difficult economic challenges. But that can really limit sometimes who will come with you. Parramatta, actually, part of the reason why we chose Parramatta is because Parramatta is actually a cheaper location than where I am. So there wasn't people thinking, oh, I couldn't afford to live there. You could actually afford to live there easier. And so that was taken off the table. I think that made it easier for some people. So, I could do that. I could afford that.
It was probably one step down, or a couple of steps down, but it wasn't enough for people to be like, oh, I could buy a home in this area.
No, they're not
things
doing
like that.
No.
It wasn't quite that level of...
it was at least equal.
Yeah, in that respect.
Yeah.
Which, is a big thing in Australian context. Everyone wants to own a home.
But it's a factor. If you guys started to feel like, no, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to plant a church in Nigeria from Trinity Fellowship Addis. Great. Who's going to go with you? Because you've got to think about it. And there's nothing wrong with saying, I'm actually going to go by myself. But you just got to be aware that's a very different type of plant. Yeah. And I did it, so you can do it, but it's just a very different thing to what you've all actually had. You'd more be doing what Michael did. You're dropping in and like, oh, here we go. It's a bit different. And there's nothing wrong with either or, but you've got to probably know you're realistic. If you're going to build a team, generally the closer you are to the sending church, the more people are likely to go. The further away you are, the less people on the whole.
What is the ideal size of a church planning team for this location? How did you think through that?
For me, because I wanted to build an Antioch church and believe that's what the Lord was calling me to do, I wanted it as big as possible, because I just knew, hey, we want to start with a band, we want to start with a youth ministry, we want to have kids ministry, we want to start with groups. I probably was a bit more aggressive than say Michael here. Week one we started with youth and groups, and we started with the whole program. So I knew I needed people to help function those things. So we were always hoping for around 40, which is what we had.
Yeah.
I would have done it with less, but I think it would be hard. So I didn't have much of a vision for, okay, we'll go to Sydney and there's just 6 of us and we'll pray and see how we go. I think I would personally find that quite hard. I'm more of a hard launch than a soft launch person. So I knew I'm going to gather some troops and go do this. So I was pulling everybody in I could.
It also affects, what you're trying to pull off is how big your team needs to be. If you're trying to start a house church movement, well, it's very simple. It requires less. It's not easy, but it's simple in that.
Like the Southern Shire that we've talked about that going down south.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you need someone who can preach, and you need people that can love one another, and you're good. But if you're trying to start, Trinity Fellowship Mark II, then you're going to need a bigger group of people, because you're going to try and do more things, and then people are going to get tired more quickly. So if you don't have enough people in your roster, then week on, week out, week in, week out, you're going to run dry. So there's sort of like, those tensions of not too big, not too small.
And in some ways, it's tricky because it's knowing your audience. So if you're trying to attract young people, on the whole, my experience is if you can hard launch, it's a bit more attractive right from the off, and you fill a room quite quickly. Whereas if you start it in your home with your wife and a couple of people, they're like, "What? Why would I want to come to your house?" It just doesn't make sense. But if you're doing, say, a very evangelistic ministry and it's very home-based, people don't mind that at all. It's like, come to my house, we want to talk about Jesus. People are like, oh, great, because it's a different thing. They're not bothered about the show, so to speak. It's a very different entity. So you've got to know who you're trying to. It's where the target group does play in again.
Yeah.
Who am I trying to ideally preach to? Who are the people that I think are meant to be in front?
Okay, now question number 5. I reckon we could spend a good hour or 2 on it. So let's make a start and see where it leads. And I think you ought to have a lot of good questions on this one, I would say. So I'm willing to take questions on this, but let's just see where we go. So how will you develop and train your team so that they are ready to help plant a Sovereign Grace church?
Yeah, I mean, again, it depends on how many you're taking from a Sovereign Grace Church already and how much you're starting from nothing. For me, I was pretty much starting from nothing. So we met twice a week for 3.5 months before we went and planted the church. And I should have had longer. If I'd had my time over again, I would have been like, should have taken like 6 months. But we just taught, to be honest. We didn't call it a church at that point. We called it the planting team. And the whole premise is, look, we did a course called Starting Point, which was really a discipleship course on our values, on who we are. So we looked at what does it mean to be continuationist? What does it mean to be reformed? All sorts of topics. We looked at singing. Why do we sing? Because I wanted them to buy into the theology and the practice of what we're doing. We did that for a long time. We did it midweek, and we did it on a Sunday morning throughout that whole time. So we really, in some ways, as we were building that team, we started spending a ton of time together. So I wanted, by the time the church launches, we're actually quite close. We're excited. We're praying together about the area. We would often try to go to the area, even if it was just to go out for a picnic or something. It's just like, let's go there, let's go visit, let's just be around people, let's get a feel of where we're going to be. We did that a lot. We even tried to hire some facilities different times in the area, so you start to get a feel, and the church starts to get a feel, this team. So that's what we did. We didn't actually say to people as well that they were on the planting team until that kind of finished. So it was like, if you're interested in coming with me to plant in Wahroonga, then great, let me know. And people would email or they would call me and you'd be like, well, you should come along. You come along on Wednesday night. We're meeting at my friend's house and we're just going through material at the minute. And so it was very discipleship heavy to help people understand. I think I should have had longer. I think if they're coming from a Sovereign Grace Church already, you could do it in probably the time I had. Because you want to get to know each other. You want to get to know, where are they gifted? If you're going to deploy people, it's like, well, how do you know? Where are they gifted to be deployed? Where are their strengths? I think if you're going to a place like what you were saying, where it's like, okay, some mental health issues, I'm going to try and recruit people with those specialities. I'd probably go and ask people, as in, have you considered? Would you pray about coming? And I'm picking people. I'm trying to build a team that's going to help me build the church when I get there. So in your type of situation, for example, I wouldn't be trying to recruit people that are terrible at evangelism. I'd be like, yeah, that's going to be a challenge. I'd be like, I'm trying to get the best evangelists in this church. Please come with me. Come and help me.
Or not very hospitable, or...
Yeah, you're just certain strengths that would probably be needed. I'd be very akin to that. Whereas in your situation, it might be like, I need a slightly different strength, so I've got to be thinking about that. I mean, if you're going to try and reach out to lots of young people, for example, and then everybody that puts their hand up to go are like 50, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, yeah, it's going to be a challenge, because straight away it's going to be a bit of a culture clash. People tend to find attractive kind of where they are, who they are. And so there was lots of things that we viewed in that, but the main thing we did was starting point, and then often talking about the area, praying for the area. We did a lot, casting vision a lot about what type of church. So the stuff that you've just done in terms of location, this is why we picked that location. These are the people there we're going to try and win. And my hope and prayer is that we're going to be a 200-person church within a few years. That's what I'm dreaming about. That's what we're aiming for. It just casts vision for people to go, oh, I think I could join that. Or they go, oh, I don't really want to do that, which is okay. But better for them to say up front and know up front than, oh, I thought this was going to be something different. And then they'll just leave you. And that has a very demotivating effect. You want to make sure by the time you launch, they're really built in. So starting point was on the whole.
So how did you develop maybe a leadership team within that?
Yeah. Well, actually, before I even moved to Australia, there was Mike, who was already meant to be planting in Australia. I made 2 trips to Australia before I moved. And I started spending a lot of time with Mike and Patrick and Mark, Jesse, who I got to know. So Brendan, it was very quickly, was building relationships with men way before I even moved out. And they were men like you. They were good men. They were solid men. No, I wasn't inviting them to be a part of any team. But I was deliberately inputting into them and trying to assess them. Now, all they thought is I was being their friend. But actually, I was being their friend. But I was actually also thinking, could this be a man that could help me lead? So we did it very deliberately. And you remember even in the early days, we used to have like a little core team, and I would always be inviting more people on that. Because I'd be like, oh, you should come.
Yeah,
should
you
come.
invited me on
and
it.
I'm not inviting you on the core team, but just come and be part of our evening and our retreat. I'd love to have you involved. And then I'm seeing, can they do this? Are they able to? You have to take, I think it's like your message this morning. This is probably where the risk piece comes in a bit. It's like, yeah, they're all a bit new. I might be wrong, but I've got to build with somebody. I can't just sit on my hands. So yeah, I was deliberately building relationships with the hope and intent that some of these would become leaders. And they did.
Very similar to what Michael's doing with you guys, pulling you into the eldership
investing
meetings,
into you.
giving you guys the chance to do stuff. He's taking a risk every week. He could do it all. I mean, maybe not the worship. He could do the dance. But by investing in you guys, he's developing the future leaders.
He is. And he's assessing you, as you know. The reality is you're doing both. You're investing in, but you're also thinking, is this a guy?
He's judging you.
He's judging you. Is this a guy we could build with? And that's important. And you'll need to do the same. You will need to have, at some point, people that you're like, I'm giving my life away to these people. And we're going to see if the Lord raises them up. And if they do, I'm going to back them 100%, and we're going to build.
Yes. Okay, so for me, it was pretty similar, actually. I did quite a similar process. We had a bit more time. We went from February through to September.
And you were still in our church at that point.
Yes.
So yeah, they're still in our church, but he's now started to build a team.
Yeah,
which I'm fully supportive of. That's great.
Yeah, he was fine. So in November 2018, we decided, I was back from Pastors College for, 4 months? And we were like, okay, let's plant a church, let's do it. Like Dave, these were the guys saying you should do it now. So we had an information night within the church and said anyone who's interested in the Parramatta church plant, come. We only had about 20 or 30 people there. I was probably hoping for more. I wanted to steal more people. And I put together like probably an hour-long proposition to the team of sort of all of these elements, trying to pitch and recruit. And really, this is kind of day one of being a pastor and being a church planter is, can you win the hearts of people to follow you? Can you gain their respect? Can you pitch it in such a way that they're like, I trust this guy.
To take a risk. Yeah.
And then, so what happened after that was I invited people to make an expression of interest. And then I met with them one by one and met with, each of them and spoke about what are you hoping for? What are your dreams? What would your expectations be? Because I was younger than a lot of the guys, and in Aussie culture that's not so bad, but some of the Asian cultures where age is a real thing. So if they're 37 and I'm 30, or at that time 27, 26, I was making sure, are you okay with me being your pastor, even though I'm a decade younger than you?
They've got kids. You haven't got kids, for example.
Questions like that. And so we built this team, and then in February we gathered. We had our first night together, and then for 6 to 8 months we met once a week on I can't remember, Wednesday night or something like that. And we did very similar stuff. We went through these values, these virtues, and then how do you do a church? How do you do mission? How do you do worship? How do you do the gifts? Where are we going to go? And we met in parks. We went to picnics. We did things like that. We just tried to get in and amongst the area. That was stuff we could do because we were planting not very far away within the same group of people. Then we did a launch evening where we tried to gain people from outside the church to come and join.
Just as a caveat, just I'm involved in all these things as well. So he's leading it, but I'm saying to our people, please consider going with Roddy. And even at the launch night, I'm saying the same, as in, look, I planted in Wahroonga. He's moving over the group, but please join his church. And that helps people not feel
that was so good for us because I don't know how many people would have joined, whatever, but because...
I think they would, but I think that it helps. They see partnership right off the bat. They're like, oh, okay, all right.
And a lot of this stuff you got to figure out with Michael. Be like, how do we want to plant a church? How do you want me to raise up a team? Before I left Pastors College, I went out with CJ Mahaney and I was just talking to him about, all these elements. I said, what advice would you have for me as I seek to plant a church? And he just said, you only get to do it once. So whatever you do, leave well and do it in partnership with your pastor. And if they want you to slow down, then slow down. If they want you to speed up, then speed up. But do it in a way that honors the sending church because they're taking a massive risk on you. They're saying goodbye to people that they've invested in, and so that was really helpful. And so the whole process, I don't know, you could judge how I did it, but I think we tried to do it completely in complementarity.
It was great,
in partnership, in joy, going, could I have this? No, okay. What about this? And would this hurt? Would this work, etc.
Because it also plays in. I know we haven't got there yet, but it also plays into the partnership piece. That if Riley's in my church, but he's going around and asking everybody if they'll leave or go to another church, that can leave a bad taste for people. But it leaves a much less taste if I'm saying, hey, please consider whether you'd go on a plant with this guy. And then people straight off the bat are like, oh, okay, well, it's a whole church thing. We're all involved in this. And we would pray. Lord, we'd start praying for Parramatta way before.
Yeah.
That's important. Well, before they've planted, it's a great question. Before they've planted, he's not even a church plant. They're just all part of my church. So until the day comes when we're laying hands on these folk and they're off, I'm still responsible for all of them, even though he's starting to influence them and help them, because they're still a part of our gospel communities. They're still a part of our church. Functionally, it's the same. So you literally are, both theologically and philosophically, they are going from my responsibility to Riley's responsibility on this day. It's not left too grey. And once the church plant is started, we didn't think of it as a church plant ecclesiologically. It's a church. So if things go wrong, their new pastor is on it. Then there's nothing to do with me anymore in that sense. It's now you. And we dealt with it just like that.
I think you're not really... Well, I had the privilege of not having a team that needed any discipline.
They might have done if Faza was there. He might have wanted to
Yeah.
bring the rod out.
If you were on my
He wants
team,
to bring the rod
we
out.
might have needed some discipline.
There's a few here I've noticed.
But no, we didn't have a category for it, because mainly people were like all in.
They were great.
Love the Lord, giving, serving. They were excited, and so.
They weren't our weakest people. They were.
Yeah, there was only one couple that were.
Yeah, one couple that were.
Yeah.
But even that wasn't church discipline. They were just more weak.
Yeah. And so. And then one of the things we tried to do in that time was develop who's going to be sort of the group within the group, what we call a core team. So they're not elders, but they're going to be like
leaders,
like you guys, functionally serving in an elder-like capacity, helping me think through things, helping me to do certain tasks that I can't do. And so I chose Arby. Well, this is a good example, actually. I chose Arby, Richie, Henry. And then there was Adam. He was an intern, but he wasn't really part of the team. And so we had a small group of 4 guys. But one of the guys I really wanted on my core team hadn't been baptized. He was a Presbyterian by background, but hadn't been baptized as an adult believer. But he was really good. He's now pursuing ordination, so that's the kind of guy. But I was like, I can't even put him on my leadership team because he's not yet baptized. And we take people into membership in our church that have been baptized as infants with the hope that we can win them to credo baptism over time rather than making it a line in the sand. And that's just our decision. But we had to, I spoke with Dave because I was like, I really want Richie on my team. He's amazing. He's one of my key guys, but he's not baptized. And Dave's like, well, you can't have him. You can't put him on your core team. How's he going to lead anyone? What's he going to do with new people when they come that they're not baptized? Is he going to tell them, well, I'm not baptized, but you should? So then that really put a halt on things. I had to spend 3 to 5 months trying to convince him of credo baptism, he and his wife. So, and by God's grace, over time, eventually he saw the light and decided he wanted to get baptized. And as a result, he could join our leadership team, and he's been an integral member, obviously, ever since. And so some of those things are good, though, because they're your convictional pieces. So you don't want to put someone on your core leadership team who doesn't hold one of your convictions, because they're going to steer, eventually, if they have influence, they're going to steer the church away from
if they're good leaders, they'll flavour everything.
Yeah.
So as you know, that's the concentrate. That's the concentrate right there. So, and not everybody. So say you build a team of 5 people, and the church starts going off. Not everybody is talking to you anymore. They're talking to these other ones, and so then the conversation comes up of, I've been wondering about getting baptized, but I'm not sure. What's the guy meant to say? He's going to say, oh, look, I haven't actually been baptized. So now we've got 2 people that haven't been baptized, and we're off. And he's going to say, well, that leader said it was fine. You're off. So we're really quite strict to that core group of, we've got to be on the same page, because otherwise we're going to go.
Yeah.
We're going to
Now,
build
you
something
could
for
make
change.
some concessions and be like, oh, there's
Little
theological,
things.
but
Yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
to answer that one quickly, we met in a group on weeknights, And then we would do worship and hang out and do teaching, go through all these things. And then on a Sunday, we would still gather at his church. Because we lived there, we could do that.
So functionally, if you can imagine it, it might look like all of Trinity Fellowship, Bole or whatever. Actually, they sit over there. And these guys are all preparing to plant. But on a Sunday, they're still here. They're getting around everybody. They're totally the same as everybody else. But eventually, they're gone. You lay hands on them and they go.
And what ended up happening is bit by bit, they stop seeing Dave as their pastor and they start seeing me as their pastor, even though it hasn't happened yet. Just through influence and time, and they know they're going, their hearts start to change. And
it takes two. The truth is it takes two to do that, which comes into that partnership piece again. It takes the guy who's going to actually to win their respect. Because you can give somebody responsibility, but in some ways authority is earned. If I'm actually going to go with this guy and I'm going to have him oversee my life, and you have to earn that. So he does that. But my job is also to help people understand, I'm right behind Riley. I would love to go on his church plant. You know, I'm very encouraged by giving him opportunities to preach, so he's getting exposure to people. And people needed to regularly hear my support of him. So I'm pushing, and he's pulling. And by the time people go, they don't even blink. They're often sad because they've been with you in some cases for like 10 years. So they're like, oh man, I'm so grateful. But they're ready to go. And if any of them at any point, which didn't happen, but if any of them had, I don't know, been ringing me up saying, hey, I could really do with some counsel on something, I'd say, hey, brother, I love you, man, but I'm not your pastor anymore. And speak to Riley. And then if you need help after that, let me know. I could speak to Riley, see if I could help you. But I'm pushing all the time. Very, very important part of the process. Otherwise, it gets quite strange. But the planter's got to earn it.
And then we honor as we go. So as you leave, you're not going, yeah, these guys, golly, we got to move on.
So different.
Yeah. No, we were like, we're trying to still build them into you. And so even after we've planted, Dave comes in and preaches. I had Dave speak at our church camp because we want to be connected. I want my people to love Dave, and I want my people to trust him and respect him because we're partners, we're family together, and he's my primary spiritual influence. And so I want them to know him, and I want them to know that, I'm still being helped and counseled.
So you're relationally close, and even in part of a Sovereign Grace umbrella, you're close, but you are autonomous churches. And you have to get that in here. So you're not a Bole campus church of this church. It's like, you are your own church with elders and you make your own decisions. But as we'll see on Friday, but how do you work together? That isn't like the one pastor doing all that. It's no. It's how do these pastors now work together and enjoy that? And it's actually a lot of fun. It's a lot easier. But that's a really good pickup. And I think one of the things that's very important, again, just going back to where we started, humility will be tested quite quickly, and because my experience is the men that people will follow aren't the ones that are saying, I can't wait to go, we're just going to do it very different from that church. That doesn't really win people. When they go, I'm so grateful for what we've had, and I don't really want to do much different at all, but I'm sure there'll be nuances, I'm sure there'll be things that will be different, but we want to give thanks for our sending church, and then I want to lay out for you what we're thinking about us. That wins people into, I could follow that guy. You know, he doesn't sound like a really proud guy. There's things you can do, but it actually starts to come down to the values again and how you position yourself.
Yeah, one of the big things we had to train our team in was serving. Because when they were in Dave's church, some of them weren't even serving very much.
Yeah.
There's a big church. There's not that many things to do, right?
Right.
But to plant a church, suddenly people had to go from serving 1 in 4, 1 in 5 weeks to 1 in 2. To go from, not leading being a member of a life group and coming when they can to leading one, to, these small groups and things like that, or taking on the job of organizing all the rosters, taking on the job of the finances, taking on the job of evangelism and all these things. And now what my job became is, all right, I meet with them. This is how you do it. This is what it looks like. Okay, this is the priorities we want for this ministry. Are you willing to do that? Then you meet with the next person, and then you do that for 5 or 6 people, and then you just make your way back around. So in my calendar, every 4 weeks, I'm meeting up with my key leaders to care for them and their soul and their marriage, because this is what I learned from Dave, and then to care for their ministry, to make sure that they're doing it. So I'm not doing it for them, but I'm caring, I'm walking with them along the way. And that's been a really great thing that's just, I think, kept my team healthy without people imploding or blowing up.
Is that true? I mean, even part of developing training a team is you are going to ask them at some point, hey guys, because this is a theological issue. I'm not, as the pastor, going to do everything. I'm called by God to primarily preach and teach and pray and equip the saints.
And prophetic dance.
And prophetic dance with the twinkle fingers. But I'm primarily called to preach and teach, pray and equip you. So here's what I'm wondering. If you could pick any job in the church, apart from preaching and teaching, what would it be? Because I want to get to know you. I want us to function as a body. And I would deliberately not do things. So it'd be like, because you can do a lot of things, but you're like, no. So if somebody said, hey, I like doing administration rosters, I'd be like, that's fantastic, you got the job. So you're going to do our rosters, and who's got, and you're getting to know this team. So you're like, hey guys, I've noticed that you two are fantastic at hospitality. It's such a spiritual gift. Is there any way you could influence our church with that and start thinking through the Sunday mornings? How can we be hospitable? So you're very much trying to get this team all playing their part. That's a really important part of the training tool. So everybody feels really needed, really involved, and ready to go. So you might, because of that, decide, I'm not going to take this person on the team. And I think that's legitimate as well. You're not assuming that everybody who wants to go, you're going to say yes to. Because somebody might be going because they don't like Michael, but they like you.
Yeah,
that's not a great start, because I guarantee they won't like you at some point as well,
Yeah.
and we'll go full circle. And you want to be weeding those things out. So in some ways, discipline doesn't tend to happen on church plants because you've worked it out before in terms of, hey, I think right now you're best to stay.
Yeah, one of the things Dave helped us do was really say, look, these guys aren't as strong. You're probably not going to be in a strong enough position to care for them. So don't take them on your church.
Yeah, we had a few
team.
needies.
And there was probably one couple we shouldn't have. There's definitely one couple we shouldn't have taken. But we hoped by taking them it would go like that. But in fact, it went like that.
Yeah, and they were harmless, so they weren't going to harm the plant. They just didn't really go.
Yeah. So there's so much on this. This is so much of what you're doing is developing and training your team, because as goes the health of your team, goes the health of your church.
Yep.
And the bigger the team, the more work this is, because the more people there are, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's slow, and as people do things, they don't do it as well as maybe you would like or you could do it. But you've got to have patience and grace, and this is where encouragement comes into it, and gratefulness that you're thanking people for what they're doing, and building serving into this team so that they see themselves as servant-hearted people. They live to serve. All those elements are so vital. So if you can train your team to embody those Christian values, they're not sovereign grace values. They're just fruits of the Spirit.
Bible.
But if you can have that, oh my goodness, how much easier it is to lead a church full of people who are humble and holy, people that live in a fostering and encouraging environment, so that when mistakes happen as a team, you're not yelling and fighting with each other. You're going, oh, thank you so much for serving in that way. What you did was so good. Like what you guys did in your meeting before, where you were identifying evidences of grace. We do that all the time, because we want to build a team that are cheering each other on rather than tearing each other down. If you build a team, service, we've already spoken about a generous team. You want to teach your people generosity, so that, because it's going to cost a lot of money to do things, and you want your people to be, your church plant team to be the most bought in. All be giving generously, tithing as much as they can, going over and above, giving food, hospitality, bedding, whatever they need to do, because that's going to be the life of your church, and that's what new people are going to come into. And when new Christians become Christians, they're going to meet people like that and go, oh, that's what a Christian is, that's what a Christian does. And then fellowship, you want people that are willing to live their life with others. They're not just thinking, well, I come on Sundays to help this church service happen. They're thinking, no, this is my life, this is my family. But you got to teach on that. You got to model it. You got to build it in. And then
otherwise, you end up with the strange scenario where you plant a church and you think you want to make sure everybody's getting around people at the end, exactly like what you said earlier on. We tend to stay an hour and we talk. I think it's excellent. I think it's really clever leadership. It's actually fellowship and prioritizing those things. But if your team doesn't understand that, you might find you get it, but the service finishes and your team have just left, and you're like, whoa.
Well, they define regular coming as,
1 in 4.
Yeah, I come every couple of weeks.
And even service, they're like, I don't mind serving like now and again, but I can't do more. We're very upfront. Hey, if you're going to come, this is going to be really hard. So you're joining the Marines. We're going to need to be all in. We tell them right up front. So that
Yeah.
whoever you've gathered, it's like they're an enthusiastic, passionate bunch that are saying, let me at them. I want to do this.
When I first spoke to the members that were interested, I put up a picture, and it was
He did. It was very cheeky.
it was a very cheeky picture, but it was a picture on the screen of a cruise ship. I said, "This is Sovereign Grace Church, Sydney."
That was us.
And then I said, "This is what our church plant will be like." And it was a couple of guys in a rowboat. And I was like, "If you're going to leave the cruise ship, you're joining the rowboat, you're going to grab an oar, and if you're on and you're not doing anything, you're just weighing us down." So, those kind of things where people realize, okay, we're all in this. And it's wonderful. Because you see people do things that they've never done before. You see giftings that they've never used. I mean, some of the guys in our team were hardly serving in the church, like I was saying. But now they're on my core team leading.
Well, their gifts weren't like truly being...
Yeah. There just
gifts
wasn't
weren't
space.
needed because other people are already doing it. And suddenly you go and you're like, man, I had no idea that guy was such a gifted. Oh, that lady was so... It's just so beautiful.
So good.